This video covers the assignment 18.2. We're going to do the same thing we did on 18.1. We're going to attack a couple of problems together. They're problems that as I went through, I was worried about you doing on your own or wanted to make sure you really understood what was being asked, because half of the time these EOC problems aren't really as difficult as they seem as long as you know what you're doing. And sometimes the words make us confused, and so I want to go over a couple of them with you, and then you're going to spend the rest of class finishing up these problems. So first one we're going to start on is number 2. The sum of the first n consecutive even numbers can be found using s equals n squared plus n, where n is greater than 2. What is the value of n when the sum is 156? So this is a lot of ugly words to basically say, here's a quadratic equation, find when y equals 156. Okay, so to break this down, make it as simple as possible for you, we're going to go to y equals, and we're going to type this quadratic equation in. So instead of n's, we're using x's. So x squared plus x, that's my quadratic equation. And then they want the value of n, so they want x when y is 156. So I'm going to go to the table, and I'm going to look on that right side, and I'm going to scroll until I get to 156. There it is. And my x value is 12. So this problem looks really ugly and actually isn't that scary, and you can use your calculator for the whole thing. So make sure you're reading these problems and trying to figure out what in the world they're asking of you. Next, we're going to go to number 8. So number 8 says the starting annual salary for an office worker at a company is $29,000. If the company awards an annual increase of 6.2%, which graph models this situation after the office worker receives X annual increases? So this is an exponential function. Excuse me. We just worked through some of these. So remember, this is our starting point on our Y value. So we want to make sure all of these answer choices are starting at about $29,000. And we can immediately mark out C and D because they do not have the correct starting amounts. Okay? From there, we're going to have to maybe use our calculator a little bit. So our A value is 29,000. And then there's an increase of 6.2%. So remember that would turn into 1.062. And this is an exponential, so we put the x and the exponent. Make sure you Beyonce this to the left, like we did in the last unit, or unit 15. So I'm going to use my calculator in that table again and try to figure out with the two that are left, which one makes the most sense. So I'm typing in the equation, starting growth raised to the x. Remember, growth is bigger than 1. Decreasing would be less than 1. But A and B are both increasing. They're both starting at about the right spots, and they're both increasing. So if I go to the table, I'm going to look at just one point. So the point 1, what should it be at? So after 1 year, I should be at about 31,000. So for answer choice A, that makes sense. But for answer choice B, my graph is not even close to that point. So A is going to be my answer. So that one is a big piece of paper with a lot of ugly graphs that basically all you have to do is write your equation and figure out 1 point. Okay, next we're going to look at number 11, another systems problem. We have a bag containing 18 coins consisting of quarters and dimes. The total value of the coins is $2.85. Which system of equations can be used to determine the number of quarters Q and dimes D in the bag? So remember, we've done some like this before, but they trip us up every time. Every time you see a total value of coins, that's going to go on the outside. Now remember, we have some amount of quarters Q and some amount of dimes D. We don't know how many, but we do know the value of those coins. Quarters are worth 25 cents, and dimes are worth 10 cents, and then our total money is $2.85. So we're going to need one of our equations to have this, and that's where those numbers come from, the 0.10 and the 0.25. They're not in the problem, but it comes from the value of the coins. Now, based on that, we can immediately mark out A and B because they say quarters are worth 10 cents, right? And then if we look at C and D, this one's good, but D has the values of the coins with the total amount of coins. So just by knowing that one equation, C is my only option. We're also going to look at number 12, another exponential. So the exponential function modeled below represents the number of square kilometers of land occupied by cane toads X years after this animal was first introduced to Australia. Based on the data, which measurement is closest to the number of square kilometers of land that will be occupied by cane toads in 40 years after this animal was introduced? So for 40 years, that's going to be an X value. So I'm going to try to find an equation and plug in that X value of 40 and find my Y value. So I'm going to go to Stat and Edit because I can see my graph here, but it's going to be kind of hard for me to predict where this is going. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in my table so I can get an equation to use. All right, so I'm typing this table into Stat Edit because a table is kind of the easiest way for me to be able to find something quickly. From here, remember it told us up at the top, it's an exponential function. So I'm going to click Stat, scroll to Calc, option 0 for exponential, and get my equation. So my equation's going to be, my equation's going to be about 36,492 times 1.08. And then remember, I'm wanting 40 years, so I'm going to plug in to the 40. Okay, so 36,492, and you can use that 36,500 that we already had. That's okay too. Raised to the 40 because we're trying to find when X is 40, and we get almost 800,000, which is going to be answer choice D. So this one looks really ugly, has a lot going on, but all you really have to do is plug it into Stat Edit and then use your equation. Next, number 13, in an electrical circuit, the voltage across a resistor is directly proportional. So this one's telling me what I'm going to need, a proportion, to the current running through the resistor. If the current of 12 amps produces 480 volts, how many volts would a current of 1.5 amps produce across an identical resistor? Record your answer in the space below. So we're talking about amps and we're talking about volts. It does not matter which one goes on top and which one goes on bottom as long as you label them. This part right here tells me 12 amps for 480 volts. Okay? Then they want to know how many volts, so we have an unknown volt, for 1.5 amps. So I'm filling in my proportion, and from here, all I have to do is cross multiply and divide. So I multiply these in my calculator for 80 times 1.5. So 720 equals 12V. So cross multiply and divide. So V equals 60. So just because it's open-ended doesn't make it scary. That one, all you're doing is setting up a proportion and solving. And the last one we're going to go through is number 25. So go all the way to the last page for this one. That's going to be page 9. And they ask me which expression is equivalent to 2x squared plus 7x plus 4. So with this one, you can kind of go two ways with it. If you want to work forward, totally fine. If you want to factor, totally fine. If I'm looking forward, remember, if you take the last number times the last number, it should give you that last number. So if I do -1 times 4, I don't end up with a positive 4 for A. Same thing with B. If I do 1 times -4, I don't end up with a positive 4 for my last number. If I check the last number, it works on C. So what I'm really looking at is it C or is it none of these? So again, you can factor or you can work backwards from your answer choices. If you're factoring, you're looking for something that adds to 7x and multiplies to 8x. Now the problem is there's not a lot of things that multiply to 8 that also add to 7. If we want to check the multiplication, maybe we narrow if it's answer choice C or not. X and 2x makes 2x squared. X times 1 is 1x. 4 times 2x is 8x, and 4 times 1 is 4. And when we combine those, we end up with 9x. However, the problem wants me to have 7x. So this one is actually none of these. If you wanted to factor, you could put your product divided by x in the table, and you're looking for two numbers that add to 7. The problem is I can't get to 7. 1 plus 8 is 9, 2 plus 4 is 6, and now I'm back at 4 and 2. If I go to the negatives, 1 and negative 8 is negative 9, 2 and negative 4 is negative 6. So there's not a way for me to get to 7, which is why it's none of these.